In this tutorial, we will go over some basic features of a graphing calculator, specifically a TI-84, and hopefully will help you save some time as you're doing your calculations in your science or statistics or even math classes. Let's take a look. So the first thing I'd like to point out is the proper use of parentheses as you're entering your expressions into the calculator. So for example, to enter this expression that we see on the screen, we need to use a set of parentheses to include the numerator and another set of parentheses to include the denominator. Because if we don't do that, once you enter the division sign, the calculator will assume you're dividing 10.2 by 6.25, but then it will multiply the entire expression by 3.1. Now let me show you what I mean by that. Let's go to the calculator screen. So here I have entered it correctly by opening a parentheses, and as you can see there's a parentheses, and then enter the given expression, which was 5.4 times 10.2, then close the parentheses, and then division sign, open parentheses once again, 6.2 times 3.1, close parentheses. Now if I did not put the parentheses, again this number would be divided by 6.25, but then the 3.1 would no longer be in the denominator. So this is the proper way to enter it, and when we press enter we'll see the correct answer of 2.84. So to the correct significant figures, we should be using two significant figures, and the answer can be rounded as 2.8 millimeters in this case. Now let's just suppose for the second item I'd like to point out to you, let's say that we made a mistake. As we're entering this expression, it wasn't 10.2, but let's say it was supposed to be 10.8 that we were supposed to enter. So the only difference between this and that is a change in one decimal point here. Instead of 0.2, I have 0.8. Now, instead of entering that entire expression all over again, what you can do is you can enter second and then the enter key. It reproduces the entire line from the top. Now you can use your arrow key to go backwards and just place the cursor right above the 0.2 and change that to an 8. And occasionally, let's say in your editing, you also need to enter another decimal there, let's say 0.81. But if I enter the 1 right now, it will actually overwrite the parentheses, so that's not really helping us. So let me go back and put the parentheses there. So if there was a 0.81 there, it's also helpful to know that you can insert a character by doing second delete, inserts a character, and let's say you needed the 1 inserted in there without deleting anything else, and you can certainly do that. But for this question, I just want to change the 0.2 to a 0.8. I can delete that extra 1 there, and now we can simply press enter, and there we have the correction after the changing one decimal. So let me make that correction. So 3.01 is the answer for our new question. And to the two significant figures, that also will be 3.0 millimeters. Again, I'm using two significant figures because you go by the smallest value, smallest number of significant figures in your given expression. Since everything is being multiplied and divided, that is your the rule. And in this case, the smallest one is this one or that one, 5.4 or 3.1. Both have two significant figures. So we round our final answer as 3.0. That is to two significant figures. Now there is one more way, and as I mentioned here, with the newer TIs, you can also use the upper arrow key to edit an expression. Let's see what we mean by that. So I'll go back to the calculator. Instead of doing second enter, in the old days you had to do that. If you have one of the newer calculators, you can also use just an arrow key. So let's say that we wanted to make a correction in this line, and you can keep going up and up. It will bring back your history of things you've done. And when you find the one you like, simply press enter. And press enter. Make any changes that you're willing to do. Like in this case, we again change the 0.2 to a 0.8. Any other changes you need to do, and press enter. So you see with the newer operating systems, you have the ability to just use the arrow keys. And even if you have an older calculator, if you kept the cable and you go to the TI website, my understanding is that you can download the newer operating system, so you too can have these nicer features that the TI has given to the newer calculators. Okay, so let's take a look at the third point I'd like to make about about using your graphing calculators, and that is beware of the E notation on the calculator. And so when you're aware of that, you'll be able to interpret the results correctly. For example, if you're dealing with very small numbers such as 0.001 times 0.0004. Let's see what the calculator does for that. So let me first clear everything. So I'm going to enter 0.001 times 0.23 zeros and a 4. Okay, when I press enter, the calculator gives the answer in this different notation. And many times I notice students will look at the first number, but they'll ignore everything else. But in this situation, if you have E notation, that everything else is really important, it changes the entire number. So 4 times e to the negative 7. Again, look at this as your exponential notation. Simply means 10 to the power of. So we have 4 times 10 to the negative 7 as our final answer there. So we can rewrite that as 4 times 10 to the negative 7, and depending on how your instructors would like you to leave your answers, you may also need to convert that back to decimal notation. Like in statistics, I usually ask my students to write that as a decimal notation. So that means move the decimal 7 units to the left. So the first time you move the decimal, it will go from here to here. And then you're going to move it 6 more times. So you're going to have 6 zeros placed in front of the 4. And that's where you're going to place the decimal. So we're going to have 6 zeros and a 4. And in some cases, to be super careful before the decimal, you may also want to indicate technically this is 0 point. And then you have 6 zeros and a 4. So be careful with the E notation. Always look all the way to the end of your expression and interpret it correctly. Okay, the next point I'd like to make is the importance of the use of nestled parentheses as you are calculating an expression. So for instance, to evaluate this quantity right here, you have a set of parentheses for this product, a set of parentheses for that product. If you were to enter this entire expression as you see it into your calculators, you will actually get a wrong answer. Because what the calculator will do is, when you take, suppose you put parentheses around this as well, and you put division sign, and you put exactly as you see it, it will divide it by this group, but then it will multiply everything. It will not divide. Notice this is in the denominator. You want to divide that by that quantity. But if you enter it the way you see it, this quantity will end up being multiplied with that, not divided. So how do we remedy this situation? Well, you have 2 possible options. Notice that when you multiply things, you don't really need an extra set of parentheses there, right? So technically speaking, you could actually delete those inner parentheses. So you could interpret it correctly by just multiplying a string of expressions. And then for the entire denominator, 1 set of parentheses would be sufficient. Or another thing you can do is you can use another set of parentheses to surround the entire denominator, such as this. And in either situation, you will get the correct answer. So let's go ahead and enter this into our calculators. So to enter the numerator, I started with a parentheses, 1.61 times 10 to the 3rd power, and the power key is your caret symbol. Right above the division sign, so 10 to the power of 3. Now again, with the newer operating system, that takes you literally up as the exponent. And if you were to put your close parentheses right now, you see what would happen? You would end up getting it in the wrong position. So let's go back and delete it. So with the new operating system, you need to use the arrow key to get out of the exponentiation notation. Now close the parentheses and then division by, and I'm going to enter this nestled parentheses by starting with an open parenthesis for the entire denominator. Then I open another parenthesis, and now I'm going to enter the entire expression as we see it. So as we're entering the denominator with this format, when you get to the end, you're going to need to enter 10 to the power of negative 5. And at that point, just make sure you are using the negation sign, not the subtraction sign. So let me point that out really quick. So 5.1 times 10 to the power of, again, we don't want the big minus sign here. We want the little negation sign. So to the power of negative 5. Again, use the right arrow key to get out of the exponent, close the parentheses, and I'm going to close it again for the entire denominator, and now we press enter. And that is our correct answer. It's going to be roughly 0.10 to the correct number of significant figures. And I chose to go with this double parentheses notation because yes, here you could get away with it because it was all multiplication, but if there had been an addition here, for example, you would really need to have the extra parentheses there surrounding the entire expression. So, I would say whenever in doubt, use extra parentheses. It's safer to use it than not to use it, I would say, in terms of avoiding errors. Fourth, and rounding that to correct number of significant figures, we get 0.10 grams. Now, let's say that you wanted to convert this into an answer in scientific notation. Note that your calculator already has a built-in scientific notation mode, and let's take a look at to see how we can use that. So this is the answer we got. We want it in scientific notation, so I will click on mode, use the right arrow key, press enter on the word SCI, short for scientific notation, and to go back to the home screen, press second mode, which is quit. And now just press enter to re-execute that command in scientific notation. And there we have our answer, 1.018 times e to the negative 1, or 10 to the negative 1, really. That's what that means. And if you check that, 10 to the negative 1 means move the decimal 1 unit to the left. If you move it 1 unit to the left, you will indeed get the answer that we had up there. So that is indeed the correct scientific notation format for the same answer. So that answer was 1.0 e to the minus 1, or 1.0 times 10 to the power of negative 1. And the last thing I'd like to point out to you is a way to enter expressions in scientific notation using the capital E notation, which some of you may prefer this, some of you may not, but let me just quickly point that out to you that it's there. So when you're entering an expression such as the one we have on the screen here, so normally you would enter 4.5 times 10 to the negative 3. But instead of saying times 10 to the negative 3, you can actually enter it as follows. Second comma accesses the blue expression above the comma, which is EE, or just E. So 10 to the negative 3 is just simply E negative 3. That's how the calculator understands that to be. So that's a shortcut notation for 10 to the negative 3. And divide that by, the question was 3.72 times 10 to the negative 5. Once again, the shortcut notation is do second, comma, it brings the E, and we want to the power of negative 5. So negative 5, close parentheses, press enter. Now, right now we're in scientific notation, so the answer came out to be 1.2 times e to the positive 2. But if we want to get out of that mode, we can go back to normal by pressing enter, and then get out of the mode by doing second mode or quit. So now if you press enter again, you will get the answer without the scientific notation. And then we can also round that to the correct number of significant figures. And I did that in the last step right here, and I left it as 1.2 times 10 to the second power. I hope you've benefited from this short tutorial on how to use your graphing calculators, specifically TI-84. And I hope that you will use these tips to save some time and to get your calculations done accurately in your respective classes.